Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dropping Bars. I have with me today none other than my very own village compadre. I have with me Kadon Douglas today, and I'm in a very good mood. And the reason why is because my team, Paradise FC International, just won for the fifth time the Waggy T Super Knockout tournament in Grenada. Victory last night, 6-0 over Hard Rock Sports Club. So I'm in a very good mood. And my guest today just happens to be the perfect guest because guess what? Just like me, she is a Paradise woman. Kadon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting news, but no surprise.
I know, right? yes, Team Paradise, victory. Okay, great. So Kadon, why don't you tell me who you are and what do you do? Who is Kadon Douglas?
So I am born and raised in Paradise, St. Andrews. I've been living in Canada since 2006, but I've lived more than half of my life in Canada. Right now, I'm the executive director of an organization called BIPOC TV and Film, and that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, working within the television and film production sector in Canada.
Awesome. And I want to go in a little bit deeper on that. But before I even go there, I want to go back to the beginning for you because, you were born and raised in Grenada, in Paradise, just like me. Our team was victorious at the game last night. So I want to touch a little bit on growing up in Paradise. What was that like for you?
Oh my God. I go back each time and tell people what a privilege it was to grow up in Grenada specifically and in Paradise. How I grew up in a large community. A lot of people may already know I'm an only child, or I was an only child for the first 16 years of my life. My father is Lennox, also known as Skish, also known as Walking Bakery.
Yes, man, Skish. Big up Skish.
Yeah, who now lives in New York. So I was an only child, but I never felt like I was alone because I had so many people around me, whether it was cousins by blood or family, who I'm not related to. But, we all grew up in the same place. But growing up in Paradise, it was just vibrant, full of life. And I tell people how it was freedom, I don't remember sitting in the house for a long time. You're outside playing. We used to play Olympics.
Yes.
And even with football, that is in the DNA of Paradise, as much as the bridges, as much as the river is, the cocoa, everything. Yeah. Football is another way of life. And grew up around it. I don't understand anything about the sport. I don't know. I know that there are goals on each end and that happens. But for me, it was the social interaction around it, going down to the park on an evening to watch a game, So I think that's what it was like for me growing up in Paradise. And I have two very different experiences. So I born in Grenada, lived there until I was 5 years old. And then I moved to Canada to be with my parents. And then when I was 10, I returned to Grenada, went to St. Andrews Methodist, went there, and then graduated onto SAS. And so I have two different experiences in the country. One as somebody born there, having all the time with family, being in that rural community, and then the other part, somebody returning to the space as well.
Okay. Right, and you speak about the football, and I can't stop talking about it. And it's interestingly enough, your Claude Douglas is your uncle,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he was one of the founders of Paradise Football Club. Not even sure you know that.
That is very shocking because I don't know if I've seen Uncle Joe play a game of football in my life. Get mad at me. That is so founder of the club.
Yeah, he's actually, yes, he's one of the founders of Paradise Football Club. Going way back when, and so it's and your experience is one that I had as well. Like I mean, just growing up in Paradise was it was everything for me. You know, growing up in the Coco, it was just everything for me.
I think one of the memories I have from it was I remember I think it was an Easter, I went to spend time with family in St. George's, and there were mangoes out. So I was just like, I'm going to have a mango. And they're like, no. We actually like cut the mango and share it. I'm like, what is that? What is that? Bring me back in paradise where I can just go under somebody's tree, pick up a mango with it. Because I was like, what is this life? Bring me back. You know?
I know, right?
I knew that's how life wasn't for me.
Yeah, I think that was one of the best things for me too, was just growing up and being able to just go. I had like different mango trees in my yard and in the neighbor's yard, and you know, it's like the neighbors, and so nobody told you, you know, you can't pick the mango. I mean, obviously you have to say, okay, hey, Mr. John, I'm just picking out a mango, and he'll be like, yeah, go ahead, you know. But it's like the mangoes were there, the golden apples, the this, the that, the fruits were just readily available. You pick it, you wash it, you eat it. Sometimes you don't even wash it. Let me tell you something. What happened one time with me? We were picking mangoes, what we call stoning mangoes, pelting stone, so the mangoes will fall. And there was this one. It was a guy who was with. I can't remember who it was. We were in the graveyard picking mango, and he goes, "Oh, I don't like my mangoes. Any mangoes that fall on the grave or touch the grave or whatever, I don't want it." And he picked a really nice, juicy mango. And the mango fell. And I just grab it, put it on the grave. And I'm like, snap. It touched the grave. He's like, I don't want it. I'm like, yo. And I took it. I'm like, you're lost, you know. So yeah, so I mean, growing up in Paradise, growing up in Grenada, that was great. Now let's turn guests a little bit. One of the things that you worked, and you still is working in the film and television space. Now, how did you get involved in film and television? And is that something that you always wanted to do? Like, what was that like?
Yes, so as I said earlier, I lived in Canada from age 5 to 10. At the time, my Aunt Debbie Douglas, she was also producing on top of everything else that she was doing in the community. And then also her partner was a film director. So I kind of grew up seeing that live, you know, people actually creating content for the screen. So the possibility of it was planted in me at a very young age.
Okay.
And also I love film. I love TV. If you ask anybody about, you know, I could spend the entire day just watching things. I currently pay for like 9 streaming platforms. I it up last week. I'm like, hold on, this is a lot of money, but this is what really fuels me. So I've always wanted to do that. I think I've always been a creative person, writing stories. And it was funny because as a child, I would read a book and know that would make a really great film. You know, that would be a really great TV show always. And what was lovely is that I also grew up seeing a lot of Caribbean film and TV and theater, a lot of Oliver Samuels, you know, growing up. So always thought like that is something I want to do like so badly. But it wasn't until I had my son in 2009. And then a couple years after, I really decided, I'm like, hold on, this is what I want to do, you know? And I'm going to invest in it. I didn't go to film school.
Okay.
I have none of that formal training in it. So I was like, how can I get it? And, you know, hustlers, you know?
Yeah.
So I enrolled in a program run by a community organization called Manifesto that was supported by the Hot Docs International Documentary Film Festival. And I believe it was a 12-week program, once a week, downtown Toronto, to learn about filmmaking from beginning to end.
Okay.
And I was like, yes, it really sealed it for me that this is what I want to be doing. And then I was invited to apply for a fellowship with Hot Docs called the Doc Accelerator. So I did that in 2013. And part of that program, we got passes to go to the festival. Hot Docs is for me one of the largest film festivals in the world. One of the top 3 documentary festivals in the world.
Right.
So I did that. They gave us training, gave us passes to the festival. We got a chance to network, meet some really great people. Some of the people I met then back in 2013 were still very close friends now. So we grew up together.
Nice.
In the industry. Part of that program came with an internship afterwards. So I was very fortunate to intern at a great documentary production company called Reel to Reel. And they really adopted me into their family. It was a husband and wife team. The husband's from Croatia, the wife's from Australia.
Okay.
And really brought me into that and taught me the ins and outs of documentary filmmaking. But not only that, they taught me about the politics and the ethics of filmmaking as well. My boss at the time, Ann Pick, she was the chair of the Documentary Organization of Canada. Also a really loud, very vocal advocate for ethics in documentary, for rights for documentary filmmakers, and for filmmakers in general as well. So it really brought me into seeing that side of the world in terms of policy and advocacy work. So that was my beginning. And I always tell people I did my first internship was 6 weeks. I got paid $600.
Okay. Wow.
But I was like, I just needed to get in to the industry. And I'm like, with $600, I could buy a bus pass.
Exactly.
And I could buy some groceries.
Yes.
For 6 weeks, I could survive on that. And then they took me in and I worked there full-time on staff for 2 years. So that was my beginning in the industry.
Okay.
So I'll pause there.
Right, and I'm gonna go a little bit deeper because now you went from there. That was your beginning from $600 as an intern to now you are the executive director of do we say BIPOC or BIPOC?
BIPOC.
BIPOC TV and film. So how did you go from a $600 for 6 weeks intern to executive director? What happened there?
So in 2015, I got another fellowship at Hot Docs called Diverse Voices. It was sponsored at the time by Shaw Media, and then it turned into the next sponsor was Chorus. And with that, got even more access to the festival. We got training. They brought in 8 of us from across the country as emerging producers. As some amazing people who went through this program who are really close friends of mine now who are doing amazing things in this industry. So when I was there, it was the first time I got like the highest level pass for the festival. And that brings you into the rooms where things are happening.
Ah, wow.
And there is one part of the festival called the Hot Docs Forum. And that's when you are pitching your film to international broadcasters. So BBC's at the table, PBS, like anybody name it, they are at the table listening to your pitch to see who's going to invest into it. And sometimes there's competition amongst the broadcasters, like who's actually going to get the project.
Right.
It's in a very intimidating space. It's held at the University of Toronto. It's kind of like it brings me back to movies like Ben-Hur and so on, like those museum type spaces.
Right, yes.
In the middle, there's a long table. All of the broadcaster and network representatives are around the table, and you're at the end pitching it. So imagine that.
Intimidating, huh?
And when I looked at that table, I looked around it, and I saw that there was only one Black person at the table. She was a representative for PBS in the States. And looked around and saw like, whoa, these are the decision makers. These are the people who are deciding what ends up being on TV, what ends up making it to festivals and cinema and so on. But if there's only one Black person there, that puts a lot of us at a disadvantage, in terms of people understanding our story and why it matters.
Right.
Because a huge part of your pitch is why it matters. As many of you may know, documentaries are usually very depressing stories about the worst of humanity. Sometimes you get a fun music documentary,
Yes.
Once in a while, or something that's really heartwarming. But most of the time, it's very heavy material. So I really took that in at the time, and during that festival, I'm like, I want to change that. I want to change what that room looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to be one of the people at the table in the future. So I got home, like, what is a commissioning editor? What do they do? How do you become one, And I was crafting out a path for that. So that was one of the big things for me. And what I had to do, so I really saw I wanted my work to be a mix of creativity and advocacy work.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see, how can I help filmmakers, people who are professionals in this industry, to get to that level.
Right.
And around 2015 too, I had grown really tired of, because I was on top of my full-time, I was also freelancing, and I'm like, that is crazy. I can't keep this up. My son was around 5-6 years old at the time. I'm like, I want to be a more present parent. So I'm like, okay, I want a 9-to-5 that pays really well.
Right.
I'll tell people, documentary is really not the industry to go into if you want to make a lot of money. So
Mm-hmm.
that up front. But what we had to, so I started looking for jobs in organizations where I'd be able to do both. And that's how I wound up at Women in Film and Television, the Toronto chapter. So Women in Film and Television is an international advocacy organization, grounded in work around gender equity, getting more women into the industry, providing them with opportunities to advance their careers. So I worked at the Toronto chapter, which still is the largest chapter in Canada of the 5.
Okay.
And started working there as their communications and engagement manager. So did that there for a while, and that's really how my profile grew in the industry and how I got deeper into my advocacy work. Because a year after I started there, Harvey Weinstein news broke.
Yes.
The news about that and the hashtag Me Too movement started in Canada. It was hashtag After Me Too. So I got really into the politics of the industry. Around that time, I was invited to join the steering committee, which is also called a visioning committee, of a new organization called BIPOC TV and Film, which is founded by a Chinese Trinidadian named Natalie Yonglai. So Caribbean people doing things.
Oh, yes.
So started by her, and it was really grassroots at the time. I still kept my full-time job. I was just volunteering with them. But really I also used at the time a lot of my connections and knowledge that I gained through working at Women in Film and Television to create opportunities for the group. So when in 2020, when the organization decided to incorporate as a not-for-profit, Natalie called me to ask if I would like to be the inaugural executive director of the organization. And imposter syndrome stepped in.
Oh boy, I know.
I was like, what is this? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what an executive director does. I don't know what this is, and why me? Am I going to mess this up? Because I also knew we were in a very crucial time in our history, So I don't want to mess this up. And it took many calls with Natalie, with some of my friends who had to be like, hey girl, remember who you are. You've done your stuff over the years, you know what you're doing.
Yes.
So I started in the role in January 2021, and it's been a roller coaster since. And I don't like roller coasters, but it's been thrilling and maddening and all sorts of emotions at once. So
wow,
that was my journey into BIPOC TV and film. And what I tell people is that this is really my calling. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I treat it as such,
Yeah. I mean, and I'm like, when I saw that you were named the executive director, I felt so proud. And just I'm like, this is somebody who came from where I came from, you know. So like, yeah, like we can do it. We can do it. Just go there, own your space in the world.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, I was going to say too that I'm also building on years of organizing. You know, sometimes when I'm doing some of these interviews, I go back to being in like Rangers in SAS.
Oh yes.
Being in Rangers and in Girl Guides. Also, Kimron, I remember after Ivan, I think I pulled a couple of you together. To be like, and Kate was part.
Yes.
Kate was part
Yeah.
of them.
Yes.
Pulled all of you together. Be like, what can we do as young people, you know, in Paradise to change? And like being a very young organizer, like there's some things I wish I had done differently, you know. But it was a great learning experience, you know, for me. And learning how to do community organizing, that was very important. And then after I moved to Canada, a couple of years after, I joined with a couple of friends of mine and we created Spice Youth Toronto.
Yes.
Like
with Trisha and the team.
Yeah, you know.
And I joined years after.
Yeah.
When I moved to Canada.
So I mean, like we really set that up to see like how can we support Grenadian youth who moved here, you know, especially for school. You know, what do they need? What can we galvanize around them? And so I think like all of that, I even go back to my 2 years of teaching in SAS as all of that preparing me for where I am today. Standing in front of teenagers for 8 hours a day, it really prepares you for standing in front of some of the decision makers in Canada.
True.
So I think like every single thing that I've done up until this point has prepared me for it.
Exactly. And like I think it was Steve Jobs who said that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect it looking backwards. So now looking back, you can see, okay, everything you did really was preparing you for where you are today. And so now, were there any obstacles that you faced along the way? And if yes, how did you overcome it?
Oh my, I think for me, the biggest one has been self-doubt, you know, so I'll start with me, you know. And I would say like just being very honest that I've always had anxiety. So I'm a very anxious person. I'm also a very worst case scenario kind of person. So sometimes I would spiral, you know, into the self-doubt, you know. And thankfully I know you had my best friend Tahira Simmons on recently, you know, who has really helped me, you know. She's such a loving and giving person, and so wise.
Tell me about it.
You know, who has provided me with some skills, some tangible tools that I could use to navigate my anxiety as soon as I tap into that. So that would be like one of my major obstacles throughout the years. A big one for me too has been just because I didn't go to film school, you know. I also had my son. I had my son at 24. And so I couldn't really like go back to school full time. So any of the learning about the industry had to fit into like my work schedule as well, you know, so taking classes along the way. So I think for me, it has taken a bit longer than it has some other people, you know, in terms of rising in the industry and also building those connections. I've had to put in way more effort into it, you know, as opposed to having like a built-in network as well. So that's one of them that I've seen. But I always tell people like, find the learning where you can. And also you don't actually need film school. And I know some schools are going to be mad at me. You don't really need film school to do your thing in this industry. A lot of it is learned on the job. There are so many secrets in this industry about how you actually do it that you don't learn in film school. You know, you learn it once you enter the workforce.
And you're proof of that.
Yeah, you know, so I'm like, here I'm standing, you know. And then I think like in terms of further obstacles for me has really been right now in terms of my advocacy work. You know, Canada is, I said earlier, in a very crucial phase in its evolution as a country. You know, that we are finally being forced to face the atrocities this country has committed against Indigenous people, against Black people for centuries. We're finally getting there. And a lot of the racism and colonialism, it's built into our cultural policies. So what I see now is that it's going to take some time to get us to where we need to be as a country, in terms of how we fund projects, who gets work, who gets access to things, who are the decision makers in this industry, because it's now an undoing of decades, decades of policies and practices and so on. So it's that, so I'm not at the point of overcoming that.
Because that will take, that's systemic. So it will take some time.
Systemic part, but I am wading through that right now. And some days I just want to scream at everybody, and cuss up. And I don't curse it, but like sometimes I'm just like, I could cuss up a good tambourine whip, and that's what I need to say, So I think that's some of the frustration and some of the obstacles I'm facing now in terms of what is actually possible, so we could change people's lives in the present, while also influencing future policies.
Okay, and I imagine then that going through all that there are major lessons that you would have learned along the way. If you would say, what are like your top 3 or so lessons that you learned along the way?
Big one for me is around listening to my intuition. Anytime I don't do that, anytime I ignore my gut, things go wrong. Even when it comes to, like when like my spirit doesn't really give with this person, with this place, that there's just something, I don't know what it is yet. I can't name it. I can't place it, but it's there and it's nagging at me. I'm learning more to listen to that voice, to that thing, listen to my spirit much more. And just saying that to go based off of that. And every time I have, I've been rewarded through it, So that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. And sometimes like I'm very stubborn. Like I want to do things this way. I don't know what this is. I'm going to do it that way. But learning how to listen to my intuition has been a big thing for me. The other one is patience. So all of these things are like, so one, I'm stubborn. 2, I'm very impatient. But patience is something that I've had to learn a lot of, in terms of knowing that the time will come, the right moment will come. And I say like, when I chose my son's name is Cairo. I didn't know the meaning of it. And Cairo spelled similar to the city in Egypt, but with a K. And when I came home and I looked it up, I learned that it's linked to the word kairos, which is similar to, it's around time, it's thinking about time. So then there's chronos, which is chronological time, and kairos meaning a divine time, fate. You know, that things happen when they're supposed to happen, when God has said that, yes, this is the time for it, And then there's also another meaning of it, very similar, meaning that there is a point, a sliver of time when it's the opportune moment to take action, and how poignant it is that is what my son is named.
Yes.
And that's become a recurring theme in my life, not just thinking about a chronological time, but thinking about what is the divine time, what is the opportune time, what is the time that God has ordained for something to happen. So and that's where the patience taps into it, like the timing is going to come up. It's going to happen when it's supposed to happen. We cannot force it. We cannot force that,
Yes, I agree.
So that's been a big lesson for me. It annoys me at times. I'm like, I want this to happen right now,
I know.
But just knowing that it will unfold when it's supposed to. And I think another big lesson for me is, oh my gosh. a big lesson for me is just knowing. I think for me, a big part of my evolution has been finding my voice. For those of people who knew me from like SAS from Grenada, I know a lot of people knew me as like very quiet, wouldn't speak up a lot, and that's because of that same imposter syndrome,
Right.
that same self-doubt, that's been in me from a long time. But in terms of how beautiful it is, to actually find your voice. And it takes a lot of time. A lot of times when I'm speaking on, like, I'm making speeches or I'm on a panel or something, I'm usually trembling so hard inside. I'm not that, but to know that how my speaking could liberate others, standing in that. And it's been hard, and just thinking about, like, there's so many times in my life where I wish that I had spoken up, so I'm trying to have less of those moments going forward in terms of just me speaking. And even that ties into, I think I'm going to give you a fourth one, just thinking about how we address conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing how to address it, the importance of addressing conflict. It's a lesson I've recently learned, how to do it in a way where we could empower each other, where we could where we could like lower harm, decrease the amount of harm that we cause to others as well. But that's been a big thing for me that I had to learn. I'm a very avoidant person, where if I could just walk around and pretend it didn't happen, I would do that. But I've learned in the past few years, how important it is to just address it head on.
Mm-hmm.
And don't do it in a way that diminishes somebody else,
Right.
I think a lot of times we talk about like being brutally honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, but does it have to be brutal?
Good point.
Does it have to be? And some people are like, oh, I'm just blunt. I just have to speak the facts. But why don't you ever speak facts? And why aren't you ever blunt about beautiful things? Why aren't you ever doing it with love and so on? But I think that there's a way for us to navigate conflict with love at the center of it. And I've been forced into that in this job. A lot of times I have to intervene with very uncomfortable situations that have taken place in the workforce, and I have to do it in a way that's with a lot of discernment,
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of diplomacy as well. I'm cussing off people in my head.
In your head.
In the face, I'm like, I have to be calm, cool, and collected. I can't let these people ruffle my feathers or anything like that. So that's been a big thing for me.
Okay, awesome, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the last one is I'm glad you spoke about it, and you asked the question. Yes, we can be brutal, but does it have to be? You can speak truth and be honest without being brutal. So that's great. And so, Kadon, thank you so much for coming here, for dropping bars, for sharing with us, for sharing with me. I really appreciate your time. And as we wrap up, in 1 minute, if there is one thing if you could speak to young Kadon at, let's say, 12 years old, just fresh back in Grenada from Canada, what is one thing you will say to her?
Relax. Relax and be a kid. Be a kid. And that's one thing I would say to her, and I would tell her that her present and her future contains so many possibilities for her, and not to dim her light for anybody.
Absolutely. That's lovely. And that's a lovely way to end this episode of Dropping Bars. Kadon, thank you so much for coming on.
Shout out Paradise, Posse, The Junction, Susan Douglas.
Yes. Susie, big up yourself.
Susan Douglas and Judith Douglas and Blanche Douglas, the matriarchs that are at the center of that community there, and all my cousins, and shout out Eva George and the family Ironfoot, everybody, like, they all contributed to who I am today. So
absolutely. Douglas pride. This my people. These my peoples. Awesome. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. Really appreciate your time. Again, shout out to Paradise FC International, the 12th. This is the 5th championship, but it's the 12th annual Waggy T Super Knockout. So out of 12, I guess 12 years of the championship happening, they've won 5 times. So, yep. I mean, talk about dominating football in Grenada. Big up Paradise FC International, big up everybody from Paradise. So, thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode of Dropping Bars. See you next week for another episode where I will have another great person on with me as we drop some bars with you. Have a good one, everybody.